All right, so if you use your diagram that you just made, this could be a little tricky, right? So this is, if you guys did it in groups, so if you could just share or look at somebody else's while we go over these. We're going to identify each statement as never true, sometimes true, or always true. It's helpful to think of the dogs, I think. So remember, all dogs have 4 legs, for example, right? Give me an example. Unless they got injured. Okay. If they got injured, yes. So, for example, is a terrier a dog? But are all dogs terriers? No. No, and that's what we're going to do now with these Venn diagrams. So it can be a little confusing. So first off, a rectangle is a parallelogram. Look at your sheet. Your rectangles are all in here. Is a rectangle always a parallelogram? Yes. Yes, because you see how it's fully enclosed by the parallelogram circle? So no matter what rectangle you choose, it also has to be a parallelogram. So this would be always true. So questions like these will show up on the test as well, okay? Second question. A square is a rhombus. A square is a rhombus. Look at your chart, find the square. So I hear sometimes and always. Sometimes? So give me an example of a square that isn't a rhombus. Can you point out one in the picture? Do you want to change your answer? Never? So there are no squares that are also rhombuses? So it says a square is a rhombus. Point at your square. Everybody look at your square. Is the square also inside the rhombus circle? So does the square have to be a rhombus then? Yes. So always has to be. Okay? We're going to skip the next one for a second. We'll come back to that one. Quiet, please. Quiet, please, gentlemen. A rectangle is a square. A rectangle is a square. Always? So look at your picture. Find the rectangle. Yes?
Yeah, no. Doesn't square have all equal sides?
A square does have to have all equal sides.
Yeah.
So it can't be?
A rectangle cannot be always.
Let's go back to the definition of a rectangle. Gentlemen. So what's the definition of a rectangle? Quiet, please. A rectangle has 4 right angles, right? If we look at a square, does a square also have 4 right angles?
Yeah.
So, if I draw a rectangle like this, is that a square?
No.
No. Let me ask you this, though. Is this a rectangle?
Yeah.
Why? Because it has, Leslie? Please pay attention. Because it has 4 right angles? So do you see that this is still a rectangle?
Yeah.
But it's also special because it is also a square. Are all rectangles squares? But can some of them be squares? So which would you say? Was it always true, sometimes true, or never true? Sometimes. Guys, this is very difficult for some people, and we're not paying enough attention for the wrong answers I'm getting. I'm getting a lot of wrong answers and not much attention. So a rectangle is a square. Sometimes it can be. Okay? So for example, that is a rectangle. That's not a square, right? However, that's really bad. But that is still a rectangle, because for a rectangle it only needs 4 right angles, right? But that's a rectangle. Is it also a square? Yes. And if you notice on your Venn diagram, the rectangle circle, you see the rectangles? There are some that are not squares. Do you see? Everybody see those? But there are also some rectangles inside that are squares. Does that make sense? So sometimes. Clear? Yes, correct. And that's the same thing with a terrier is always a dog, right? But dogs are not always terriers. Sometimes they are, but not always. Okay? A parallelogram is a square. Take a look. A parallelogram is a square. Is that always true, first? Are all parallelograms squares? No. Can it be true sometimes because they're squares? Yes. Yes. So sometimes parallelograms can be squares. Just like sometimes dogs can be terriers. Okay, not all the time, but sometimes dogs are terriers. A quadrilateral is a rectangle. A quadrilateral is a rectangle. Raise your hand, please. A quadrilateral is a rectangle. Okay? Change your mind? Leo? No? Never ever?
No.
Never ever a quadrilateral?
Always.
Sometimes it can? So what does quadrilateral mean? Can you have a four-sided rectangle?
Yeah.
So sometimes it's definitely true. Now, is it always true? Are all four-sided figures rectangles? No. Take a look at, for example, this one. Is that one a rectangle? No, so only sometimes it's true. A square is a rectangle. Take a look. Look at your picture.
No. Yeah. No.
Okay, so let's take a look. Find your squares. Find your squares.
Yes. Always.
Okay, time out. So we know it's either sometimes or always, right?
Always.
Why is it always?
Because we're inside of both.
Yes, squares are always rectangles because you see how they're completely inside the rectangle circle? So these squares are always going to be rectangles. You see how they're both inside? So squares are always rectangles. A rhombus is a square. A rhombus is a square. Take a look at your chart. Sometimes? So sometimes. Sometimes is correct. Alright, up here, please. Alright. A rhombus is a square. It's sometimes. Notice, are these rhombi square? Out here? Are these three out here? Are these squares? No. But are these squares? Yes. So notice how sometimes it can, but it doesn't always have to be. Okay? So this would be sometimes. Let's go take a look at a rhombus is a rectangle. A rhombus is a rectangle. Never ever? This is the hardest one. A rhombus is a rectangle. Never ever. They could never possibly overlap. Let me ask that again. Hint. A rhombus is never a rectangle. They could never possibly overlap. I'll give you a picture. Sometimes. When is that sometimes? When you say square. So sometimes so if we can make a generalization, the always are when it's completely enclosed. So if you have a smaller circle inside the bigger one, it's always going to be true. Okay? Just like a terrier is always a dog. You have a small specific, and it's completely enclosed by the big one. The sometimes are where you go from the big one to the little one. So dogs are sometimes terriers, right? But not all the time. Because you can give me an example of a dog that wouldn't. Can anyone give me a statement that would be never true? I notice we don't have any never truths. Any never truths? Leo? So a parallelogram is never a rectangle?
Whoa.
I want a never true.
Oh, I got one.
Go ahead.
A triangle is not a quadrilateral.
Good. A triangle is never a quadrilateral. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
They're two very different things. Give me another one. A triangle is never a square, right? Another one.
A circle is not a quadrilateral.
A circle is never a quadrilateral. Okay, so the nevers aren't actually, it's going to be hard to get a never just on the paper. You got to introduce something there. Okay? Your homework for this tonight is pretty easy. It's 8.4. I want you to do number 1, and then I want you to do number 15 through 17. That was so ugly. 15 through 17. Don't worry about this for right now, okay? We're going to cover that as we go on. It's a big section. Anybody heard of President Dewey?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I hope not, because he was never a president.
Fine, that's fine.
But you've heard of President Truman, right? Harry Truman?
He was, World War II.
Anybody seen this picture before?
No.
This is the night of the election. This is the Chicago Daily Tribune. This is back before they had a lot of electronic polling and that sort of stuff. So when they were counting the votes, it looked like Dewey was going to win. And you had to print your newspaper, right? So it would be out in the morning. So the Chicago Tribune was like, okay, Dewey's going to win. He didn't win. So you got this famous picture of him thinking that he's going to win, holding the front page. But the front page was wrong. So unfortunately, he wasn't so happy. Any questions? Yes, please leave your papers on. I'll hang them up.
It was supposed to be me, man. I told you.